Boom! Our GM made a splash. I appreciate the confidence he has in me, trading away Dak and a former Super Bowl MVP in Tony Pollard and a few picks for the greatest running back in Longhorn history, potentially. I think a lot of you might say Ricky Williams, but anyways, that's not the only cool thing that happened in the offseason. We also had the draft, and our guy Rich Crawford, probably the greatest wide receiver product out of Louisville ever across any of the years I played, at least, was drafted in the first round and will be playing with CJ Stroud and the Texans. So Rich is going to be staying close by also being in Texas. I also continued to progress in the offseason, becoming a better field general and staying the same overall. And I also finally got to play the season opener since last year we lost to the Rams while Dak was still the QB. And this time we're playing in DC, and I'm as prepared as ever for the season, and particularly to be the #1 quarterback on the depth chart with the best running back, wide receiver, and tight end in the league potentially by my side. Hype for our offense might have been at an all-time high. I was getting drafted in the first round in fantasy along with Bijan and CD, but the game didn't reflect that hype. We had a goose egg on the board in the first quarter, and I nearly threw a pick six at the end of the first. We were also down double digits early, and Bijan was still on a limited snap count from a preseason injury, so our backup was taking a lot of snaps early in the game. With 3 minutes left in the half and 0 points on the board, we really had no rhythm on offense with Taven Crawford stepping in at running back, and it wasn't all on Crawford. The Commanders' D-line was getting pressure on me, and I felt like our offensive play calling wasn't working, and we should have switched to a quick passing game. On 3rd and 17, I found Mecole Hardman, who had been a really underrated wide receiver on this team, with CeeDee Lamb and Alex Davis taking most of the spotlight, along with Marshawn Ford. We barely converted the RPO on 4th down to pick up the first and get us moving forward in the red zone, and my passing stats were terrible in this game. On 2nd and 1, right before the 2-minute warning, I dove into the end zone off the scramble to get us in for our first touchdown of the game, make it a 3-point game before half. I felt like we were figuring things out, but we weren't. The Commanders came out in the second half and continued to generate pressure. And this is a team that we were a 10-point favorite over to start the season, and we were getting blown out. I got hit on a throw, the Commanders got a scoop and score, and we ended up losing our season opener in DC. You know, the O-line pound for pound wasn't that bad, but it was getting ridiculous. Teams were averaging 5 or 6 sacks for the first 2 weeks, and it didn't start out any different in week 3 in our first drive. It didn't matter what we did, play action, read option, shotgun. I was running for my life trying to get passes off before we had another ending like the Commanders game. I finally said screw it and ran outside and down the sideline for our first score. I had to keep my O-line's heads up even though they were stinking it up to build some confidence in them. And if you remembered my college days, I always made sure to treat my O-line right at Louisville. Even though things didn't immediately improve on the next drive, I don't know what took the coaches so long before finally deciding to implement the quick game and some screen pass plays, but finally we were making the defense pay just a little bit for full sending after me in the pocket every play. Right after the successful RPO, surprise, surprise, I had enough time to hit my guy Marshawn Ford on the corner route for the touchdown. And the play calling was starting to actually make some sense, and it was reflected in my stats. After the first touchdown we scored, I was 8 for 9 passing for 150 yards. In the fourth, we had to convert a 4th down from the 48, and I really didn't see anyone with good separation in man, and I realized I wouldn't be able to run for the first myself, so I just threw it up to probably the most clutch receiver on the team this season in Mecole Hardman, and he came down with it through the contact, which at least meant that we were in range for a tying field goal. On 3rd and 10, I thought I screwed up and overthrew Alex Davis, but somehow Davis tiptoed in the back of the end zone, and that was that. We escaped with a close win. Somehow we managed to have a winning record, even though we were 0-3 against the spread in our first 3 games. In week 5, we were up against the Pats, and I took a sack almost immediately, and I had to grow and realize that teams were starting to try to contain me in the pocket, which meant I'd need to step up in the pocket into pressure rather than sink back in the pocket and force my tackles into tough situations. The game was getting away from us early since we had a 3-and-out on our first drive, and then Alex Davis had the ball popped loose by a DB on our second drive, and the Patriots recovered. To start the second, we were down by 14, and if we wanted to seriously contend for a title, we'd need to grow out of this bad habit of getting down early and letting it dictate how we'd respond. We like to be a balanced offense between the passing and running game, but running the read option or scrambling felt less viable when we were down by so much. And Bijan could still thrive as maybe the best receiving back in the NFL at this point in his career, but it definitely limited us offensively in some ways, and I'm including myself in that limitation as well. We had a good drive going midway through the second, so it was disappointing when we got stopped on 3rd and ended up settling for a field goal. Luckily our D held up, so we had a shot to make it a game with a minute left, and it turns out we didn't need a minute, we just needed one play. Marshawn Ford turned on the burners at the 50 and couldn't be caught as he took it all the way to make it a 4-point game. And what other tight end is getting 40 yards after the catch like that? Well, that 4-point difference disappeared quickly, and all the work we'd done to get it back to a manageable game as the Pats went on a 10-0 run of their own, and we sputtered on our next offensive drive, and our offense continued to look like a disappointment overall. With the talent on the team at skill positions, the parts of the offense that held us back were the O-line and me. Talk shows were already talking about how trading away Dak was a mistake, that I needed more time to develop as a passer, and that we were massively underperforming against expectations and analytical predictions. Worst of all, I let down everyone who drafted me in fantasy. What am I saying though? It's only week 5, and I just found CeeDee Lamb for a catch and run 70-yard TD to make it a 1-score game. With our defense getting a stop, we drove down to the 36 with a chance to tie, but I didn't create enough time in the pocket to hit Mecole or Bijan. Instead, I ended up getting sacked. So on 4th down, I forced a pass that was at least past the 1st down marker, but it was incomplete, and we were now 0-5 against the spread and 2-3 through our first 5 games. Despite only putting up 20 points, my stats actually weren't bad. I had almost a near perfect passer rating, 2 touchdowns and 0 picks. Running the football, Bijan struggled with 7 carries for 24 yards, and Juju Smith-Schuster went off for 13 catches, 150 yards. And then Marshawn Ford and CeeDee Lamb were feast or famine. They both had huge explosive plays for touchdowns, but that's pretty much all they had. So this was, of course, a disappointment of a season. We ended up not making the playoffs. I had 33 passing touchdowns to 21 interceptions. My completion percentage was good, but 21 picks is way too many. Bijan had an average season with 1,000 rushing yards and 8 rushing touchdowns. CD had a solid season at 1,200 receiving yards and 11 receiving TDs. Alex Davis also with 11 receiving TDs. And then Marshawn Ford with 6 receiving touchdowns and 600 receiving yards.